How do you answer an exam question in the senior school? Answering exam questions is a skill in itself. Because you have to be able to take the knowledge that you have about the subject, and then answer it in a way that actually accrues some marks from the person marking the script. When you think of any exam question, you have to think about what is the marker looking for, how are they going to mark this? How many points do I have to make in order to achieve the marks? So let's take a typical question in a geography exam. This is a question about the atmosphere. The question is, explain why there is surplus solar energy in tropical latitudes, and a deficit of solar energy towards the poles. You may answer using annotated diagram or diagrams. The mark allocation for this question is for 4 marks. First of all, we have to have an idea of how on earth does a candidate achieve those 4 marks. What is the examiner looking for, in order to give each mark? A fairly typical set of marking instructions will indicate quite clearly what they are looking for, but you as a candidate, sitting an exam, don't really have that knowledge. Generally, when you're looking at a senior exam, every correct point will achieve some sort of credit. A well-annotated diagram which explains some points can get marks for each of the things that the diagram is explaining. When you are writing down an answer, you would typically get 1 mark for a fairly detailed explanation of a point, or if it's a limited brief description cum explanation of 2 factors. If the detail isn't quite there, you might get a mark for 2 relatively brief points. Typically what a marker is looking for, is a point to be made and then that point expanded, and explained in a bit more detail. You could get 1 mark in this question for, the sun's angle in the sky decreases towards the poles. Due to the curvature of the Earth, this then spreads the heat over our larger surface area. The point you are making is that the sun's angle striking the curvature of the Earth has an impact on insolation. That's the first part of it. But you need to further explain the point, which spreads heat energy over a larger surface area, to get the full mark. If you just mention the sun's angle in the sky decreases towards the poles due to the curvature of the Earth, you would get credit, but the marker would be looking for another point somewhere. It might be another unrelated point, maybe another brief point, in order to give you a mark. Another point could be the sun's rays are concentrated on tropical latitudes, as the intensity of insolation is greatest, where the rays strike vertically. So again, that's another way of explaining that in the tropics, there is more intense insolation, because the rays of the sun are striking vertically. The first part is explaining that there is greater insolation at the tropics, due to intensity of the sunshine, but the second part of the answer, in order to get a full mark, is that the sun's rays have to pass through less atmosphere. The second part explains that the rays are striking vertically at the tropics, in order to get the full mark. Another point could be the albedo effect differs from the darker forest surfaces in the tropics, which absorb radiation, in contrast to ice and snow-covered polar areas, which reflect radiation. The 2 parts of the sentence explaining the albedo effect are enough to get 1 mark for that explanation. There are obviously other points that could be made, such as the tilt of the Earth's axis resulting in the sun being higher in the sky, between the tropics, throughout the year, which focuses the energy. There is no solar insolation, during the winter solstice, at the poles, producing 24 hours darkness. Whereas the tropics get insolation throughout the year. There are a number of points that can be made. Let's look at a typical sample answer, and see how a marker might give that answer credit. Tropical latitudes receive more sun than the poles. This point would get credit, but it needs a bit more, in order to get a full mark. Sun always overhead, unlike the poles where the sun shines at a low angle. Completes that explanation, and so 1 mark awarded for those first 2 sentences. The sun's rays pass through more of the Earth's atmosphere at the poles. Again credit, and the sentence goes on saying, meaning that less of the sun's energy is absorbed, and more reflected. That explains the point, so another mark. The albedo effect at the poles means that the light colors of the snow and ice reflect the sun's rays. Again credit, but the sentence goes on to explain, while at the equator, the dark colors of the rainforest absorb heat. Again a full mark, so 3 points are made and expanded on. That would get 3 out of 4 marks for this question. I would always suggest that a simple diagram can add something to an answer, and it may be, your written explanation isn't quite clear, but that diagram helps you get over the line to make your point. If you were going to answer, the sun's rays pass through more of the Earth's atmosphere, at the poles. A diagram to show that. To make absolutely clear the examiner knew you understood the point will help you get that elusive mark. What you can take away from this sort of question. First of all, explanation is required, because explain was the first word in the question. There is no point just describing things. You have to explain. Second point is, that in a senior exam, you're looking for a more detailed explanation, in order to get a mark. Certainly more detail than required in middle school exams. You make your point, and then you make sure you have explained that point, by giving a bit more clarification, or a bit more detail. That's the only way you're going to make sure that you get credit for each point you make. The way I would think about if I was sitting an exam, I would make the point, that for example tropical latitudes received more sun than the poles. That's the point made, and then I would think, right, what more do I need to do in order to make sure I get that point across? What more explanation can I give to explain why tropical latitudes receive more sun than the poles? When it comes to answering a question, you look for a point. You explain the point, as much as you can. Assume your explanation is lacking a little bit, add more detail, make sure you put in a diagram as well. For 4 marks, you're looking for 4 detailed points, and usually that means at least one sentence with 2 parts to it, or it could indeed be 2 separate sentences, to make the point. Examiners are not looking for lengthy answers. They are looking for clarity of explanation, so it doesn't need to be a long answer. But you have to make sure that it is a clear point and that point is explained. I hope that my explanation of how to answer an exam question, and that's only one on the atmosphere, will be useful for you when you are actually preparing answers for examinations.